Today we're going to do what the internet experts said was impossible. We're going to weld up a continuous seam on sheet metal. We're going to weld it all in one pass, and we're going to do that without warping the panel. And we're going to finish it out to the point where it's ready for high build primer, all in 30 minutes, or it's free. So I just quickly knocked the head of the weld off there, and I just put the straight edge on here so y'all can see what's going on. If it'll focus. So we go down the weld, and you can see that the weld area has pulled. It's compressed and it's pulled itself outward. So whenever you weld something, like I said in the past, it always shrinks where it's been welded. So in this case, it shrunk and it pulled the metal out, except for in a couple spots right here is where we started and stopped, if you saw in the video, to kind of reposition myself. So anywhere where you start and stop with the TIG, it always kind of, that's where it leaves a weird spot. Pretty well all the way through here is slightly proud or high. So to correct that small amount of shrinkage that we got in the weld, we'll just take our hammer and the dolly on the inside, and I'm just going to go ahead and crush that weld back down flat, and then we'll come back and reevaluate and see if we were able to get that warpage out of it. You hear that ringing sound? That means we're actually squishing that metal in between the dolly, and because it's being squished or compressed, it has nowhere to go, but it has to stretch back out and level out the surface again. So we don't want to go too far with that, because if we squish it too much, then we'll stretch it too much and we'll end up with a panel that's overdeveloped, which we also don't want. So it's just a matter of doing a little at a time, checking it, and working our way across here. Hoping it'll show up on camera, but another way you can see if you're actually planishing the weld or not, if you're making any progress, is you'll be able to see, I don't know if you can see the weld bead there, but it's slightly shinier than the surrounding metal, so we know that that weld has been planished, and it's probably fairly close to being where it needs to be. But that's just another way to tell, besides the obvious ringing sound of the metal being crushed or the weld being crushed, is you'll actually be able to see the weld start to get shiny as it gets flattened out. So this is where we're at right now. I'm not too sure how much time has elapsed. I'll put on the screen somewhere how much time we've got into it once I go back and check the footage. But at this point, we're all roughed in, and we could just go straight to bodywork at this stage, and this would take like probably just one light coat of filler and block, and it will be done. Just to show you here. We've got rid of the high spot where it was welded. Everything's nice and level now all the way through. But you can see we've still got some areas here and there, which again, like I said, that would bodywork out very quickly and very easily. But I guess in the interest of taking up more of your valuable time, we're just gonna give this another once over here, see if we can get some of this the rest of this worked out just a little bit better, see what level we can get it to here. So I'll put you up on the old camera stand, and we'll get to plucking away at it. So here's the finished product here. I didn't go too crazy beyond here because I'm going to be putting a larger back window into this cab. So I don't know how big it's going to be yet. So I didn't like finish it right out basically from here in. This is not perfect by any means, but as nothing ever is. But I think, like I said, we're more or less ready for a couple coats of high build primer there, and that was achieved in 25 minutes of work, including the time I wasted looking for tools and staring off into space randomly. So there's a couple spots here you can see on the welds where I didn't quite add enough filler rod as I was welding. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. Here's how it looks on the inside. We've got full penetration all the way through. There's no pinholes, no nonsense. It's not the greatest weld in the world. I'm not an expert TIG welder by any means, and unfortunately I'm self-taught, so I'm probably doing most of it wrong, but I guess, you know, if it works, is it wrong? Probably. But anyways, you can see the heat effect zone it's reasonably consistent, but it's not great. I didn't have a great fit up on this. There was some larger gaps, especially through this area, and I also had to stop and start right here, so it left a bit of a weird spot there that I had to work up a little bit harder to get out. But essentially we welded this whole thing all in one shot, no stopping other than right here, and the area where we stopped, like I said, needed more work than all the rest of this to get it flat again. So that's how that works. Now to be fair, this is a pretty easy seam to finish out. It's down low, it's close to an area of strength, so most seams take longer or are more difficult to finish out, you know, if you're going through a roof or whatever. But the principle of what we did here applies to any TIG welding or whatever on a car body. Typically when you chop a top, guys will go through here and then they'll do a series of relief cuts to get it all to line up. And if we had done that, we would have to work a much larger area than just going down along the bottom here. So this worked out really well. In the last video, or really any video where I'm TIG welding on sheet metal, I always get comments from people screaming at me saying, you know, you don't weld a full continuous seam on sheet metal, you're going to destroy it, you're making a mess, you don't know what you're doing. You need to MIG weld. MIG welding is the best way for sheet metal. TIG welding is a waste of time. It takes too long. Blah, blah, blah. You know, well, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I agree there, but for me personally, there is no way or no other welding method that I know of, at least, you know, that you can do in your garage that could get this result in 25 minutes. Now, as a general rule, I don't get into the time invested in these projects when I do these videos, because to me the time invested is irrelevant. It really doesn't matter how long it takes to do something, just as long as you're satisfied with the result at the end. If you're learning, it's going to take way longer than, you know, if you have some practice under your belt, I guess. But the more you practice and the more you do, the faster you'll get. But if you just, you know, kind of try to rush through everything, you're already setting yourself up for failure, because it happens to me too. If I try to rush through a job, it ends up taking 3 or 4 times as long as it should take, just because I'm in the wrong mindset. And just, I guess, also as an example that time is really irrelevant on these projects. So we welded this seam on this side, and I'm still not done with it. It's still at the stage where it's just roughed in, like what we got to in the 12 minutes on the other side we did. And just to get it to the roughed in stage took me almost an hour. And for whatever reason, this side walked around more. There was more damage here that we previously repaired, but there could have still been some stress in the panel, or, you know, maybe my welding technique was slightly off from the other side, or there's a million different reasons. But just shows you that there's no way that you can put, you know, an hour or a time limit on any of these projects. It's just going to take what it's going to take. I'll show you on the inside here. You know, basically the same weld on this side. I had to start and stop in basically the same spot. again, for whatever reason, this side is taking longer, but I'm not even worried about how long it takes. It's just all part of the process. So don't get caught up on how long something takes. There are times when something like this could take me days, and that's just the way it is. With all that in mind, I don't get caught up chasing perfection. I used to try to do that, and what I found is by the time I got done trying to make one job perfect, and then I got done 2 or 3 more jobs, by the time I went back to the first job I finished, it was complete garbage and I wasn't happy with it, and I ended up just redoing it, and it's just a perpetual circle of rework and nothing ever actually gets finished. So I don't aim for perfection anymore. There has never been a car built that's perfect. There are cars that are very close to that and that you wouldn't even be able to tell that they weren't perfect, but those people, the way they got good was just, practicing and continuing to move forward. The first car they built wasn't any better than, what anybody else could build. It's just you got to start somewhere and continue to build your skills up. As I'm continuing to learn, we're all continuing to learn, and to me that's the goal, is just always learn something and apply that to the next project rather than try to chase perfection and just end up burning yourself out and not actually getting anything done. The goal of this is to get it done. So if something doesn't turn out exactly the way I like, well, I'll just keep moving on and moving forward, and by the time it's done, I probably will have forgotten about the imperfection that I was so concerned about. So people keep asking me about what the settings are on my TIG welder as I'm welding, the amperage and all that stuff, and the reality is I'm self-taught, so I'm not qualified to answer any of those questions. So if there's any professional welders watching, you're just going to want to cover your ears and plug your eye holes for the next segment. But I don't worry about amperage settings or anything. I think I've got it set at 60, but I'm not welding at 60. What I'm doing is I'm using the foot pedal, and I'm just like a gas pedal on a car, I'm controlling that amperage as I'm welding. And to me, that is the key for welding on car sheet metal. Is it's not never going to be perfect. You're either going to run into thin spots or thick spots. Maybe your fitment isn't totally perfect. You should always aim for perfect fitment, but the reality is the majority of the time you're not going to have perfect fitment 100% all the way through. So you're going to come to thin spots or spots where there's a bit more of a gap, and you're going to have to control that amperage as you go. Now, with a MIG welder, you just turn the dials and you can't do anything once you start welding. So you end up blowing holes or the edge blows away on you or whatever, and there's not really any way you can control that. You just have to keep feeding it weld, mindlessly pulling the trigger. But this, if you see the edge start to blow away, you just dial back on the amperage as you're welding, and you can just keep mowing on through. You get to a bigger gap, you just dial back on the amperage, add a little bit more filler rod in, and that to me is the key, is having this foot pedal and controlling that amperage as you're going. I don't actually know what I'm welding at. That would be interesting to know. Some welders, they display it while you're welding, so maybe someday I should have the camera pointed at this while I'm welding just to see what happens. But basically, as I'm welding, I'm continuously just changing the input as needed. In theory, you would just set it in production line welding or welding on two perfect pieces of metal. You would just set it and then just go to town and weld it all, in one steady spot. But welding on a car it just doesn't work out that way, unfortunately. So that's where this comes in handy. And again, we're always trying to go for consistency, but it just, it's not a perfect world. So you really got to be able to adjust that amperage. And so to me, that is a huge benefit of TIG welding on sheet metal over MIG welding, is that I can control the heat as I go. We get to a thin spot or a spot where it's not fitted, we can change that heat. Or we accidentally add a little bit too much filler rod into the puddle, we can just increase the heat to burn it in and just keep moving along. You know, we don't have to stop and readjust our welder, or, you know, fiddle around, or just keep glorping on more welds and then we end up with a huge ropey weld. None of that is really the case with TIG welding. So in that regard anyways, it's actually, TIG welding on sheet metal is actually easier than MIG welding because we can control that heat input, which is so critical on sheet metal. As far as the filler wire goes, I'm using ER70S-6 030 MIG wire. I find, for me anyways, this is what works best. The goal is to add the least amount of filler material as you can. If you use the thicker TIG rod, like 1/16 or whatever, you have to add more heat to it and you end up with more filler material, which makes it harder to actually finish out the weld. So the goal is, I guess, to kind of find the balance where you're only really adding the filler material just to prevent undercutting the weld, and so that you have a little bit of material on there that you can grind or file off and end up with a smooth surface. I don't like fusion welding because this old metal has a lot of impurities in it. Even if you get it as clean as you possibly can, there's still a lot of impurities that will come up, and you'd end up with porosity in the weld, and then the weld is also usually undercut. That's not really desirable. So adding the filler rod, it has a lot of cleaning nutrients in it, for lack of a technical term. So it kind of helps to clean that metal as you're welding and prevent those issues with porosity. And so you end up with a bit stronger weld and a weld that isn't undercut. But I guess it's all just finding that right balance. And I'm self-taught and I'm not a professional at this. So I'm constantly learning and trying to improve in that regard. But before anybody gets offended, I'm not knocking MIG welding. I still do a lot of MIG welding. If you've been watching the channel, you'll probably see that. You can get fairly decent results with it, and it's relatively user-friendly. And the other thing is, if I could recommend a welder to anybody who's just starting out and doesn't have a welder yet, I would start out with a MIG welder. It'll do everything you need to do on your project car, and it does a reasonably good job of it. This video is getting a bit long-winded, as they all do, so if you want to see a side-by-side comparison of TIG welding and MIG welding, I did a video a couple years back. Kind of goes over the pros and cons of both and shows a direct side-by-side comparison, welding the exact same thing, one with a MIG and one with a TIG. So I'll put a link in the description of this video to that video, and if you want to learn more, you can watch that rather than me ramble on and say the same thing I did 2 years ago. I should also mention that there's a time and place for everything. So welding everything all in one pass with a TIG, for me at least, it's not going to always be the way to go. When I go to weld this seam here, where we had to widen the roof, I'm going to weld this all in one pass with the TIG, and then I'll have to hammer and dolly and planish it out, and it's going to take a lot more work to hammer and dolly and planish this out for a couple of reasons. One, it's kind of a narrow strip, so we got two welds side by side, so that makes it more difficult. The other second reason is that we've widened this roof, so the profile of the roof has changed. So I'm going to have to be hammer and dollying a larger area here and planishing it out to get these shapes to flow together properly. Right now there's a bit of a weird spot here, and that's just due to the fact that we widened the roof and we've interrupted that shape. So that's the way we're going to do this seam. Now when we go to weld this roof seam, we could weld it all in one pass, but the way I'm going to do this roof seam is I'm going to use a process called hammer welding, and I've got a video or a couple videos on that, which I'll put in the description of this video as well. And hammer welding is where you weld a couple inches or a few inches at a time, and then while the weld is still hot, you crush it and you planish it out while it's still hot, and then you continue and move on and just do a little at a time. And what that does is it just helps keep the panel straight as you go, which on a large panel like this, for me personally, I'm more comfortable doing that because I don't have a handheld planishing hammer. So if I was to just zip this across, it's going to make a big mess of this roof, and it's going to take me a lot longer to finish that out by hand than if I hammer weld it. So somebody else might have a different technique. Somebody else might be able to weld it all in one pass, have it come out fine, and finish it out by hand that way, definitely possible. But just for me, I'm more comfortable with hammer welding it. So that's the way we're going to finish out this roof. There's no perfect technique, and everybody has a different way of doing things. I'm just showing you the way that I do things on this channel, so don't take it to heart if I'm not doing it your way. So thank you everyone for watching. Whatever this was, I don't know the point of this video, but I guess the roof is one step closer to being welded back on. In the next video, we're going to be finishing out the A-pillars. Actually, that part's already done, but things aren't quite being filmed in order here. So the next video is going to be getting the A-pillars all dialed in and finished out, and we're going to be doing the exact opposite of whatever metal finishing or whatever you want to call this that we did in the last two videos. We're going to be doing some pretty harsh cave and pavery, but it's going to be getting the job done, and that's all that really matters, I guess. So thank you for watching again, and we'll see you on the next one soon, hopefully.